So it's 2 p.m. on a Friday. You know what time that is. It's time for the 2 p.m. project with your host, Chris Kabadi. Give him a big round of applause. He's back for another session. Who knew that he'd still be here 4 weeks into it? There's not. That's terrific. Thank you. Did you see our countdown clock? No expense spared here at the interchange. Interchange? Countdown clock. We can take the countdown clock off now. It's all our money was invested in that this week, but it is fantastic to have you here for another episode of the 2 p.m. project. Great to have your company. We are streaming live to Facebook and live to YouTube. We're masters of technology here. We're just building on every week. Gets bigger. Next week, the world. But we couldn't quite get it done this week. The content, if you haven't seen this show before, the content we cover in each episode is designed to equip you with the practical and evidence-based tools and techniques that it's going to help you navigate through this crazy, crazy world. And it is a crazy, crazy world. It's an interactive show, which part of the reason why we want to go to YouTube and to Facebook is because on the right-hand side there, you can see a comment section. You can type your little comment in. We've got fantastic guests on the show today. And those comments will come back to us and we can ask those guests the questions that you want to know. We can go through that at the end of the show. All of those questions will be compiled by our esteemed producer, Double Leopard, back here today. It's great to have you back, Double Leopard. Also, make sure you subscribe to the show. If you haven't already done it through our LinkedIn link, you can subscribe. You'll get a notification at the end of each week, notifying you that the 2 p.m. project is happening on the Friday. There'll also be links through Facebook and YouTube, or you can just go to interchange.com.au. And as we have been doing for a couple of other businesses, we can customize this show for your business if it's something that you think would fit for you and your people. How would you like a TV show for your business? We bring in the guests from your business and the musical act is from your business. Contact us at interchange.com.au if you would like that. As you know, if you've been watching the show, and if you haven't been watching the show, then why haven't you been watching the show? But we've been exploring wellbeing over the last few weeks. We're going to park that for a little bit this week. We're going to look at something else because we are exploring a model that helps today in times where you might feel a little bit overwhelmed. Anyone feel a bit overwhelmed? I know, we're all feeling a little bit overwhelmed at the moment, but much of what's happening at the moment makes us feel out of control, and this model hopefully will help you, our lovely viewers, reframe the situation. So, today, a very special 2 p.m. project because we are looking at the circles of control and influence. Isn't it great? The studio audience goes mad for my guitar playing. One of these days I'm going to get a theme song. One of these days. One of these days. Today I'm joined on the show by my Interchange colleagues. As always, Gabrielle Harris and Dr. Melissa Giles. Are you there, Gabrielle? Hello, welcome to the show again. Melissa Giles is here. We unpack a new theme each week and how it relates to our world today. It's fascinating viewing. We have a very special guest speaker today, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have him on the show today. DARREN FLANAGAN is his name. DARREN is a low-impact explosives expert, but he is far better known to you and I as the man who figured out a way to blast through some pretty hard rock to free Brant Webb and Todd Russell after 14 days underground at the Beaconsfield mine in Tasmania in 2006. DARREN's story is extraordinary, and I'm really honoured to have him on the show today. Our musical performance today draws its influences from Balkan gypsies, gypsy swing, jazz and tango. If you don't know them, then why don't you know them? This is LOLO, LOVINA, Sarah Bedak and Nenad Radic. They'll be playing live. They're coming to us from Sydney today. Hello guys, thank you so much for being on the show. They'll be playing live towards the end of the hour, so you must stick around for LOLO, LOVINA. They are just fantastic. It's a real honour to have them on the show as well. Stick around for the next 60 minutes. As I mentioned, on the 2 p.m. project today, we're looking at circles of control and circles of influence. The best way I can describe this is this. Okay, we're going to look at this using a frisbee. We're going to look at it using a Beverly Hills Cop DVD and a mint slice. And so look, really, the circles of control and influence, it's really all about where do you direct your energy? And so the best way that I can describe this to the viewers out there is sometimes we direct our energy in all the wrong places, but if we just focus and direct our energy on the mint slice, then we can influence using the Beverly Hills Cop DVD, and then we don't have to be so concerned about the frisbee. You get it? No? Okay. All right. Whatever. Have it your way. Thankfully, we have someone at the organisation who is actually much better at explaining it than me. I'm going to bring in Melissa Giles, Dr. Melissa Giles here, who can talk to us, who is probably has a bit more clarity around this than I do. Melissa, would that be right, or is that an overestimation?
Well, I might have clarity a little bit more around the tool, but it seems my image today is not so clear. But yes, I do know a little bit about it, and I think it's great to say we should focus on the mint slice.
Okay, perfect. Well, if I can leave that with you, then I've achieved something. So can you tell me about the model that we're discussing today?
Yeah, sure. So it's a tool that's based on the work of Stephen Covey, and it talks about 3 areas of our life. So that circle of control is, as you said, what can we control? We've got the what can we influence and what concerns us. So if you start on that outer level, the frisbee level, your circle of concern includes the wide range of things that you are concerned about in life and work. This could be health, family, finances, the environment. They're things that are important to you. They matter. That's why they're of concern. They're in that circle of concern because they're important to you. If you go to the next level, the CD, your circle of influence includes those aspects of your life that are of concern and that you can influence. And finally, the mint slice, the centre there is your circle of control. And they're aspects of your life that you can directly control. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the thing that we can control is ourselves. So it's our thoughts, our behaviours, our feelings, the language we use. So the model really draws our attention to those different aspects of our life.
So this is a pretty crazy time for everyone. How can this tool help us at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really useful framework, and I use it a lot in my executive coaching, and I also use it from a personal standpoint as well. So when life feels completely overwhelming, and as you said, at the moment it's easy to feel pretty overwhelmed with what is going on, we know that an effective strategy to cope with that anxiety and that stress is to focus on what we can control. So it's a really useful reflection point to think, well, hang on a minute, what is in my control? What am I able to control about my current situation? It's also really helpful to think about what can I influence? So what am I able to influence? It's out of my direct control, but I potentially am able to shape and influence. And then obviously we need to be aware of the things that are in our circle of control, because remember how I said they're important to us. We need to be aware of them. So it's not about putting our head in the sand. We need to think about those things we're concerned about. But as you said, Chris, it's about where we exert our energy. So if we're exerting a whole lot of energy, things that are in the circle of concern, we're going to have very little impact and effect. Whereas if we exert our energy on the things that we can control, so thinking about ourselves and how we behave and how we act and think about things, if we reflect on what we can influence, we're more likely to be effective and happy in our lives.
So, Melissa, I know, I gave a pretty clear example to the viewers here of the circles of control and influence earlier, but if you want to back it up with something and make it even more clearer, it's up to you. Do you have an example to illustrate the application of this model?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that this week, Chris, and the example that I have is around homeschooling. So my eldest child is in prep, and this week we embarked on homeschooling. So my husband and I both work full time. We have 2 children, and we are now responsible for homeschooling. I am a psychologist. My husband works in HR. I would say it's fair to say we have very little experience teaching primary school age children. So I felt a little bit overwhelmed the first day. We went onto the app and there were already 9 activities for us to do in a day. And I had that moment where I thought, wow, okay, I feel overwhelmed. I feel stressed. I'm already feeling overwhelmed. And I stopped myself and I had that moment of reflection. I thought, hang on a minute. Okay, let's think of this model. We know that it makes a difference. So I paused and reflected and I thought, right, well, what can I control? I can control myself. So I thought I really need to stay calm. I need to be positive. I need to be encouraging in my language towards my son. So I reflected on that. I can control myself. I can control how I respond to this situation. I then thought about how I could influence my son, because after completing the first activity, he declared that he was done for the day and that one of 9 activities was plenty of schooling for him. So I then thought about the fact that, well, I can influence him. I can talk to him about how important it is to be schooled, to learn and to grow as an individual. So I talked to him about the importance of education. I also talked to him about the responsibility he has in terms of, that we need to homeschool at the moment. This is something that we need to do. So in that outer circle of concern, obviously I am concerned about my son's education, but in terms of where I'm putting my energy, I'm focusing on myself in terms of what I do and how I act in response to this homeschooling situation. And I'm also focusing on how I influence my son.
Fantastic. It's a great example, Melissa. It's something that we are all going through at the moment. I wonder how your week with your children online has been. I thought that was hilarious that he was done. He was done after a couple of activities. And while I get that, there's a few more years of school to go. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. We're going to come back to you in a second. I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk to Darren in a second. But before I do, as I said earlier, we have been looking at wellbeing the last couple of weeks. We've done 3 rounds of wellbeing up until this point. I spoke about it last week, that one of the great things that you can do to boost your wellbeing is learn a new skill. So I promised to teach all the viewers how to juggle. I set you a task. Does anyone remember? Does anyone remember? I set you a task last week, which was to learn the pop, that's the first stage of juggling. You throw it from the palm of your hand, pop, you throw it up and you try not to let it spin and you throw it between hands. It should be going across your eyes. Gabrielle, oh my God, this is the best ever. Look at my star student. Look how terrified she looks. Anyway, so yeah, it's to go from one hand to the other. Pop and a pop and a pop. Let's go to level 2, juggling. 2, I'm going to add a second one. So what we did last week, pop, pop, pop. I hope you practice, because if you didn't practice, I know where you live. I don't know where you live. I just made that up. We're going to bring a second lemon in. And this is now 1 and 2. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. You have to throw the second one while the first one's in the air. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. You say that. 1 and 2. And then theoretically, you go the other hand. You start with the other hand. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Great TV, isn't it? 1 and 2. 1 and 2. That's the lesson for this week. Last week, if you're behind, it's just the pop. Pop, pop, pop. This week, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Great TV. How dare you say you've never learnt anything on the 2 p.m. project. You're learning heaps. I'll put that aside. Darren Flanagan, our special guest speaker today. It's a great honour to have Darren on the show. So Darren was at home in Nowra in New South Wales in 2006 when he got a phone call late one night. And it was a phone call that would basically change his life forevermore. Darren is a low-impact explosives expert, and in that phone call he was asked, and probably a better way to put it is he was summoned to the site of the collapsed Beaconsfield gold mine in Tasmania. The reason? 5 days after the earthquake and the subsequent rockfall at the gold mine, Two miners who had been buried alive had just been found alive. And within a couple of hours, Darren was on a plane to the site, and his task was to try and free the men who were trapped nearly 1 kilometre below the surface, just to add to the pressure. The world was watching. I'm sure you remember this very, very well. Darren Flanagan, welcome to the 2PM project. It's a great honour to have you here, my friend.
Thanks, Chris.
So you obviously played a critical role in getting Todd Russell and Brant Webb out alive. I almost don't quite know where to start with you, Darren, but can you share some of the insights from that extraordinary experience?
Yeah, I can. I guess my story really, as you said, didn't start till 5 days after the boys were trapped. Sunday night, 9 o'clock at night, laying at home in my lounge room with my wife and kids all watching TV. And one of those little scrolls come across the bottom of the screen to say that they'd just been found alive. And I was like everybody else in our industry, just gobsmacked that they were alive, because we just couldn't believe it. And while I was watching the updates come across, our phone in the kitchen rang, and my wife Trace raced out to grab it. And she came in and said, "It's for you." And I was expecting 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, just one of my mates to say, "Daz, turn the TV on, you won't believe it, these boys are alive." But it was a phone call, Chris, that changed my life forever. It was the Beaconsfield mine, and they wanted to know would it be possible for me to blast a small tunnel towards 2 human beings without killing them, and if I could do it, how close do you get when you do kill them? And you know, human nature says you're a little bit chuffed, because of all the people they could have rang, they rang you. So I started rattling on and on and on, telling them all about our new advances in technology and how we can do things today with explosives we couldn't even dream about 10 years ago. And I explained to him all these different projects I'd done with these new explosives, and then he said to me, he said, "Darren, we want you here, and we want you here tonight," you know. And to be honest, I just went, holy shit. And I didn't think it would be possible, you know, because I said to him, I live at Nowra, we don't even have an airport. It's nearly 10 o'clock now, mate. And I said, maybe tomorrow, if you're still this keen, I can go to Sydney and see if I can get a flight down your way. And he said, "Darren, listen to me." He said, "You are going to be here tonight." And he said, "I just need one thing from you now, mate." He said, "I need you to promise me that when you put this phone down, you will go and pack a bag." So I did that, and I stood in the kitchen, Chris, and I just thought, "Darren, you dickhead, what have you done?" I honestly did. I actually thought back to my school report cards, because every single school report card I've ever had since I was this big says, "Darren talks too much," you know. And so nothing had changed. And so I was freaked out, you know, and I was just pacing around the kitchen with Tracy, and he rang me back, and they'd organised a private Learjet to land at the military base here in Nowra at midnight. And basically I got out there and went on the ride of my life and landed in Launceston in Tasmania, and got picked up at 1:30 in the morning, and then got raced out to the Beaconsfield mine. And I went on the ride of my life, Chris. I don't think I could try to really put it in words to people, just the emotion that was in that event. Having, you know, those parents and those children on the surface just praying that dads were going to come home, and having probably the most professional, best team I've ever worked with. A lot of people, some people don't see mining as professional as what it really is, but I can tell you, Chris, it's one hell of a professional industry, and they had assembled the best of the best there, and Mines Rescue was running that whole operation. And pretty much I went underground and practiced for 5 days and 5 nights, something I hoped I'd never, ever have to do. And if the audience could imagine 2 tunnels underground, 35 metres apart, one 7 metres higher than the other, and the rescue team's in this one, and this tunnel 7 metres higher but 35 metres apart, running parallel with each other, and this is where the boys were. And we basically tunnelled from this tunnel here right up through and broke into the tunnel where the boys were, and extracted them. And as you know, Larry Knight lost his life. He was crushed to death. And those 2 boys, I can never tell you, I don't even know how they didn't die of fright. The way they were jammed in that cage, and the time they spent there, 14 days and 14 nights, it's just unbelievable, you know. But I ended up blasting that rescue team to within just 300 millimetres of their bodies, and then they used jackhammers to break through that last 300 mil into the base, into the floor of that tunnel where the boys were, and brought them out. And to be standing on the cement that morning in the dark and watch those 2 boys come out and grab their tags and hug their wives and hug their kids, I've never been so proud to be an Australian in all my life. And I think I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to compare what we did with war, but I think I do understand now why Australian and New Zealand soldiers are considered so special all over the world, because I think it is uniquely Australian and New Zealand, you know, where nothing else matters but fight to save your mates, you know, fight to the absolute end. And every single person that was down there, I think, had committed themselves. They were a kilometre underground, and there was only a very few of us that were allowed onto the same level where they were, because obviously it wasn't a very safe area to be, and they wanted to reduce risk as much as possible. So there was only people allowed there that absolutely had to be there. And I know that not one of those people are the same when they came home, and that it changed us all. And
so Darren, I was even just you know, when I introduced you, I was thinking, you know, I don't even know where to start this conversation, because it's so extraordinary. Like, it's kind of folklore in Australia now. It's almost 14 years to the day that it happened, Anzac Day 2006. And but where do you start? Like, I know we've had this conversation before. You were saying it was relatively new explosive technology. Is that correct?
Correct.
I imagine that flight from Nowra to Launceston was very, very long while your brain just swings into action. Where do you start in a situation like that?
One thing, the mine, I talk about courageous leadership. With courageous leadership as a leader, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about the leaders at the mine, they must be open to self-assessment, and they must be able to take criticism, and they must take on every single person's ideas. And they had a boardroom where there was about 20 professionals, and every single step that was taken in that rescue had to be passed by that boardroom, and every single member of that boardroom table had to tick off. And so it was the greatest level of men I've ever seen, Chris. When you see the different levels of authority, the different skill levels that are in that room, but when lives are on the line, people, it's the greatest level I've ever seen. And, you know, those guys, they just were the best of the best, but they also, there was no such thing as a stupid suggestion. Everybody's ideas, you know, were, you could put it on the table without any fear. And I think that, I remember Todd Russell said to me once, he said, you know something, Darren? He said, mining may have put us there, but he said, mining is the only industry that could have got us back out. And that's 100% right. And, you know, when I talk about courageous leadership, that's right through the mining industry. You know, guys in the mining industry actually get awards if they can come up with something better than their boss, basically. If they come up with something that's going to actually improve safety or improve production, but mostly on that safety level, they actually get rewarded and get awarded for it. And I don't see that in other industries. And that's what I'm talking about, that fearless leadership where a leader can actually step outside his body and look at what's happening and self-assess and say, could I have done better? You know, is this a better idea? And then move forward with that.
So I don't know what it was like when you arrived down there, but you know they'd been there for nearly 6 days trying to work out how to get these guys out. They'd recently learnt, obviously, that Brant and Todd had been found alive, but they were trapped in a situation which no one had actually encountered before, and you know there was very little idea about how to get them out. When there's so much emotion that plays into it in that moment, did you find that either you or others were kind of jumping at shadows, coming up with ridiculous ideas, were trying to control things that were outside of their controlled area, is kind of what I'm getting to?
If I can imagine, if the only way I can describe it to you is the army. That's the way the mining industry is. It's very, very, the hierarchy of control is very, very strong. And so, of course, there was a lot of emotion down there. There was a lot of young guys down there that were just wanting to do anything and everything without any thought, and that's where the management, and they were constantly with them and constantly coaching them through and making sure that they controlled themselves and controlled that emotion. It's a very hard thing to do, Chris, when you can communicate with the two boys on the phone, you know, when they're begging you to go faster, just begging you to find a way to get them out. And so it's an extremely difficult thing to control. But you know, the stress, I tell my staff, I coach them through, and I say to them, when it comes to stress, I said, I want you to imagine that you're on a factory floor and, you know, you're working in a factory and you look at the boss and you think, oh, you know, the shift supervisor, and you think, God, I love his job. You know, I'm running around here, I'm so stressed out, you know, doing whatever you're doing. And then one day you get that promotion to that shift supervisor's job, and then all of a sudden you realise that you've stepped up to another level of stress, and you look back at the guy that's doing your old job and you think, wow, I'd give anything to have that stress again, you know. And it's amazing what you can condition your body to, Chris. because this was extreme stress, and I've had stress in my life before, and you know, you go through those levels as you work through management and companies and things like that. But this was just out of control. Like, this was a level of stress, but you had to be professional enough to bury that. And I guess I try to teach everybody that nothing is ever successful without all the preparation work done first. You know, I look at that pointy end of the triangle, and you've got to get all those terrible rubbish jobs, the slow jobs, the harder jobs out of the road first, you know, and just keep your focus on that peak of that triangle to get yourself there. But you've got to do the prep work. And that mine took no risks, Chris. They flew electronic monitoring equipment in from wherever they found it in the world. That jet just flew non-stop, picking up gear and people. And that sort of monitoring equipment can tell them, if I did a blast here, it'll tell them exactly what the vibrations, the hertz, the frequency was at 1 metre, 2 metres, 3 metres, 4 metres. And, you know, and then we nearly worked night and day for 5 days straight to perfect that method. And we only used 30 grams of explosives in each blast hole. And we only could break just enough rock to be productive and move forward without creating too much vibration, because those boys were sitting under thousands of tons of rocks, and it was just this far above their chest. Like, I'm talking, you know, they had no room in there whatsoever. They couldn't, if one laid on his back, the other one had to lay on his side. There wasn't enough room for the two boys to lay both on their backs together in that basket. And then their legs were squashed up. They were laying on rock, Chris, on rock. And they did that for 14 days and 14 nights. And I just cannot believe, you know, people, they say, oh, you know, like, I could never describe what it must have been like for Brant and Todd. Only Brant and Todd will ever be able to know, you know, and ever tell you that. And I do know that when I talk at conferences and stuff, I've met lots and lots of people that are children of Vietnam veterans and war heroes. And, you know, most of those kids will tell you the same story, that their parents never ever talk about it, and they find it very, or their father. And that I remember one lady said to me, she said, but Darren, she said, well, I used to go to this meeting with him where he met with other Vietnam vets, and she said, the look in his eye changed. And she said, I could never figure it out, but I knew what she was trying to say. I knew what she was talking about. And that's when the only time that you'll ever truly be able to describe what this was like, say for me to tell you, Chris, is that you would have to have been there. Because, and that's what happens, you know, I meet other rescuers at different times and we get a little bit teary, and it's because that look in our eyes, we both know what each other's been through. We both know what we put ourselves through to be there, and that's what I'm talking about with war veterans and things like that, and Todd and Brant. Only the people that have been there and been through it will ever truly understand what it was like for the other person and what effect that had on you.
Extraordinary, Darren. What an extraordinary story. In case you've joined us late, we're speaking with Darren Flanagan, who is a low-impact explosives expert. But you would know Darren as one of the men who was, I mean, from my understanding, there were about 280 people who helped free Brant Webb and Todd Russell. But Darren was instrumental in freeing them that day through doing, I think, about 70 small explosions, if that's not an oxymoron, over the course of a number of days to free those guys. Darren, we were so keen to have you on the show to sort of connect you with the model that we're looking at. What can you control? What can you influence? What's outside of your control and influence? I think we have a tendency to underestimate our capacity to influence life, and we mistakenly place a lot of our energy into that outer ring, into the concern circle, rather than what we actually can do. It's an extraordinary feat that you've done. I've no doubt you've been labelled a hero all over Australia. I certainly remember you at the time. Does it come with a cost?
Yeah, of course, it does. I think I'm a better person now than when I went there. My eyes are wider. I see more, I feel more. I understand more about emotion, about stress, about, you know, just life, more life skills than what I had before I went there. But I get asked this question a lot, you know, I wouldn't have wanted to do it again. And I certainly, you know, I wouldn't have, if I missed it the first time, I think I would have been quite happy, you know, Chris. It was something that, you know, people say to me, God, you were so brave to go down there and you're so brave to go underground and spend that time there, and all those other people that have done that. But you know what, mate, when you're standing there and you're looking at Todd and Brant, you know, pictures on the TV, news, at the mine, anyone and everyone, if you're an Australian, a true Australian, no matter what, people that say, oh, I could never go underground, I could never do that, you will, and you would. and you would. When you've got other Australians, I love Australia that we've got no tribalism. I know that's a really political thing to say, but we are the one tribe. We fight to the death for each other, and that's the beautiful part about Australia. And I remember being in Orange once, and I did a talk for a mine, and after the talk, a young fella came up to me and he said, "Darren," he said, if I ever got trapped in a mine, he said, I would want to know there was someone like you that was trying to come after me. And I said, there will be, mate. It won't be me, but there will be someone just like me that's outside there fighting for your life. I promise you that. And that's really, really true, Chris, about Australians, true Australians.
It's an extraordinary story. I can't quite, I mean, it was hard enough even just sort of sitting there watching this live coverage. I think in the introduction I said to you, you know, the pressure was amplified because not only was everyone in Australia watching it, after those miners were found alive, the whole world was watching. It's an incredible learning, I think, of what we're trying to suggest to the people watching today while we connect to this model, focusing on what you can control. Were there things outside of your control that you found yourself focusing on, or did you just feel like once you arrived, you were just in the zone?
Yeah, I've been asked to try and describe the feeling of what it was like. And when you're surrounded by so many professionals, and don't forget Mines Rescue Australia, this is what they do. So Mines Rescue, if you get into a situation where you've got somebody trapped or something, these people, there's a separate organisation altogether. They come to your mine, they take your mine over. And so you work for them now, and they basically are absolutely as professional. They practice this every single day. They have competitions all over Australia. They train. Every single mine in Australia must have a mines rescue team that is a really high level. And so they'll have all these competitions between mines and so forth, so that they get to that level. But Chris, I've actually forgotten what I was going to say then. I do know. Sorry. And so when I got there, you can't imagine the pressure, Chris. I felt like I'd been sucked out of my lounge room in the middle of the night, and I was thrown into this massive thing that the whole world was watching, you know, and even to drive into the mine, to drive through all that media, it was frightening. And then when you got there, there's one thing I can tell you, no matter what you do in your life, you need respect and credibility. And at that point, I had none. So I turned up at that mine, and a lot of those young miners there didn't know if I was just some loudmouth shooting my mouth off, you know, and what they were worried about is that I might be prepared to take risks with their friends' lives, okay? So you've got to earn that respect and credibility. And once that had happened, Chris, the best way I can describe it is I want you to imagine that the Nile River is just swollen, flooded, and you fall in. And you're desperately trying to swim back to the bank, but you can't. You're just getting rushed along in the water, and then you try to swim against the current, trying to slow it down, and you can't. You just get rushed along in the water, but then you look out into the centre, and there's all these other people out there, and they're all in a great big circle holding hands. And you realise that the only way you'll get through this is if you swim out to that circle and hold their hands. And that's what it felt like, Chris, because we needed each other. We hugged each other. We held on to each other. We encouraged each other. When one was down, you know, you pick them up. You know, we worked like that group of people in that water. The only problem was, Chris, we didn't know if it ended in a waterfall. How, but we just knew if we did it together that we'd get there, and that's exactly what we did. And we just knew our jobs. Every single person knew their job. They knew their skill, and there was such a different mix of skill levels. You can imagine, you know, we need a guy that can climb up dirty, grotty holes, holding a heavy pneumatic drill and boring holes in a really, really encased area, you know, and you're crawling 16 metres long, tiny little tunnel. It's only 1 metre in diameter. Not what you want to do a kilometre underground in an area that's already been pretty well hit hard by an earthquake. So, you know, the skill, the courage, and then you've got the engineers that Chris, if I could try to get the audience to imagine that these two boys are stuck in this basket, this cage, which was only 1.2 by 1.2 by 1.2. So just like a pallet, they're both laying in there. It's got walls on it, and it's got all this rock on top right through to the next level. And you've got all these guys that are coming in there trying to get you, and the boys a hole have been drilled from the tunnel we're in right through the 35 metres into where they are, okay? And then they push through this tiny little camera that was shaped like a cigar, and the boys showed them inside that when they were laying in this basket, the gate at the front of the basket was busted open, and just in front of that there was one patch of the entire tunnel. One patch of the entire tunnel that was that had no rock. And they showed the engineers that with that camera. And you know those engineers using 3D CAD programs and all sorts of stuff, they knew, because that was the only area bare floor, that if we could come in underneath and break into that exact area, that the boys could basically drop their legs into that and then we could pull them down into our tunnel. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Yeah. So I want you to imagine that they sent up a little spray can up this hole into where the boys were, and they got them to mark a paint mark there. And when we bored that tunnel in underneath and come straight up into where the boys were, the mines rescue boys that got in there and went through that last section after we'd done the blasting, the first drill rod that they drilled through was 30 millimetres from the paint mark that Todd and Brant had marked. Can you imagine the skill? 35 metres away through solid rock, one little paint mark on the ground. And those engineers from Beaconsfield, those engineers from Mines Rescue, they put that team within 30 millimetres of a paint mark on the floor in another tunnel. That's how good this team was.
How extraordinary. Geez, Darren, we are so lucky to have you on the show, and I think we are extremely lucky to have you in this country. It was an amazing effort that you and many others did at that time. It's as I said earlier, it's kind of etched into our folklore. It's quite an extraordinary story. It's quintessentially Australian as well, but it's a particularly great outcome as well. Darren, yep.
I was just going to say, I do want to say this. I got excessive media coverage because the explosives was what the media wanted to hear about. You know, that's why 60 Minutes did the show on me and all that. It was because of the explosives. I could tell you so many stories about so many incredibly brave people, so many smart, intelligent people, so many people that did. Without them, Todd and Brant would not be where they are now. They may have never have come out of there. And that's the unfortunate thing about such a worldwide media event, is sometimes the focus goes to people like me because that's the exciting thing they think is going to sell newspapers or magazines or whatever, you know, and there's so many people there that needed to be celebrated and they weren't, because they were just overlooked because it was just such a massive thing, and the media picked the eyes out of the people that they were going to, you know, put in there.
Well, thankfully, I know, Darren, you're on the speaking circuit, and you tell this story as many times as you can, and we've been lucky to hear your story here today. Thank you. We're going to come back to you in a second. That was Darren Flanagan. Poor, holy moly, an extraordinary story. I don't quite know what prepares you for that moment. But it's amazing to hear it. I know Darren is a very passionate speaker on the speaking circuit. He also speaks a lot about mental health and well-being as a result of accidents like that, and the fallout that happens, not just to the people who've got the most media attention, but to all the people who were there helping. So we may even be able to speak to him about that before we finish for the hour. Gabe, can I bring you back? Gabrielle Harris, Managing Director and Founder here at Interchange. I know that I just wanted to connect you into this area as well, because I know you do a lot of work supporting boards and executive teams. So going back to the circles of control and influence, if you think about that model, in a business context, how do you see things playing out given the current situation? Oh, Gabe, I think press that little mute. Can I just take a poll of everyone who's watching? Have we ever said the word mute so many times in our life? I think you're on mute. Could you just unmute? Yeah, that's better. How do you see this model playing out in the business world?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like listening to both Melissa speak earlier and then to Darren's incredible story. I'm using this model an awful lot at the moment with the executives that I work with, because what I'm seeing, and I'm sure you will have read it in the media, is boards are actually, not all, but there are certainly multiple cases of boards saying we need to step in and take on management positions to lead through the COVID crisis. And then I'm hearing the executives that I coach often saying things along the lines of, I would have thought that my leadership team would have stepped up for this one, but they didn't, so I'm jumping in and taking it over. And I'm regularly bringing people back to this model at the moment because we all have concerns. You know, your Frisbee demonstration, the Frisbee is chock-a-block. There's so many concerns in there for us to consider and to work through. And I think the interesting thing about leadership, Darren said it so clearly before when he was saying, courageous leadership is about how do you support and influence people to do what you need them to do rather than to do it yourself, because we're only one person, we can only do so much. The role of a leader largely sits in the CD. It's about how can you influence others to be able to continue to move an organisation or a business forward rather than I'll step in and do it myself. So right now I'm finding I'm having to have lots of conversations with people about this model to say it's not necessarily that perhaps your team aren't or the executive team or your group of leaders aren't stepping up. It may actually be that you're trying to get a little more control, because when we are so full of concern, we try to create, perhaps fictitiously, a world for ourselves where our control expands rather than see that our possibility here is for our influence to expand.
I see. Okay, fantastic. Look, it's so interesting. It's interesting we did come back to it at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis when it suddenly hit, and it kind of occurred to us that this model was actually very relevant to today and that we should be talking more and more about it. We're looking at the giant frisbee. I'm going to call it the frisbee for now. This should be called the frisbee model. I got a much better, or the mint slice model might be a better way of looking at it. But I think what can I do as opposed to what will I do? And it's not just talking about, I could do that, or that's just way out of my control. Let's bring Melissa back in, and even Darren. Let's bring, or I don't know, you may have some questions while you've been hearing each other speak. It would be really great to hear your thoughts on Darren's story or any questions for him, even connected to the particular model. I think we've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'll ask in a sec. Do you have any questions for each other?
Oh, I do. Can I jump in early?
Sure.
I'd love to just hear from you, Darren. There was so much in that story that you just shared that sat outside of your ability to control. How did you manage the emotion for yourself?
I was probably worse after than I was before. While it was happening, you had that high level of leadership that was encouraging you to be strong, and they had a psychologist there that would come under. He actually gave the shift bosses a series of questions, and people did disappear from underground, and we didn't realise this until after. I didn't find out till much after. But really, what happened was, if you answered that question incorrectly and they felt that you weren't emotionally strong enough to continue, then they just said to you, "We're going to take you up to the surface," and then you were gone. And it was, that strict to make sure that they had that level of control. I was given a skill once by, everyone in their life has somebody that's their mentor, and I've had two really, really good ones. And he taught me once that, and about teaching people. And he said, when you're teaching somebody any skill, anything at all, Darren, he said, you've got to imagine that. You said you've got to make a 3D movie in your mind, and he said, and then you've got to picture that person as you on the other side of that desk, and you've got to ask yourself, if I knew absolutely nothing about this, what would I need to hear for me to be able to get what I want to teach this person? Does that make sense? And he taught me to do a 3D movie in your mind. And he said, and you walk through that 3D movie, Darren, and he said, because every single step in that process, you're going to physically do yourself in your mind. And he said, and then you'll be able to pick up the things that are, vital for that person to know and to see and to do. And it was the greatest skill. And I've trained a lot of people to use explosives. I did a lot of training for miners, and they all said that I can picture exactly what you're saying, Darren. I can, and that. I wish I could teach that skill to everybody, because it is so incredibly important to be able to process stuff like that. And then you can teach other people, and my biggest thing I think about Beaconsfield and leadership and everything else is that I don't think the mine allowed any single person that had the glass half full mentality to stay. Okay, if you didn't have that glass full mentality, if you were given something that looked impossible, if you weren't working on angles to make it happen, if you couldn't come up with your team with some way of making that happen, then you weren't there. That's as simple as that. And I just try with my own kids, my wife, my staff, with everybody, I'm always that guy. They get sick of hearing me talking about it, because every time I say, I don't want to hear the negative. I don't want to hear anything negative. I want you to tell me how we could make this happen. And I think that's, with leadership now, sometimes I see so many times that people get a promotion because of they've been with the company for so long, they're the next person to step up. And so many times you see the person with all the skills, all the people skills, all the people management skills. I often say people that rule with an iron fist do so because they have no people management skills whatsoever. And the only way they think they can get anything productive done is yelling and screaming, and that's just so opposite to the reality, isn't it?
Darren, we do have a question here that's come in from one of our viewers. The question is, when you were on the plane, when you were on the way down to Tasmania, what did you know that you could in fact influence when you were given the task?
I knew that I had a lot of experience with that new low energy explosive. It had been only in Australia for about 6 years, and very few companies had actually got access to it, but I was lucky enough the company I worked for had bought the rights to it. So I'd got to do demonstrations for the Sydney City Council and all the government departments and stuff to show them the potential of this to be used in blasting their heritage listed foundations, gas pipelines, power stations, that type of stuff, not human beings. And I guess I knew what I could offer the team in that area, and that's pretty much, apart from the fact that I give 150% to everything I do. I work 29 hours straight in that last section, and if I needed to work 48 hours, I would have found a way to do it, and it's something that my dad instilled into me, that work ethic that I just, but at the same time, I'm also aware of everybody around me and, and their limitations as well. So that you're not pushing people further than what they're meant to. I'm a great believer in, you should never, ever over-promote somebody because you destroy their life. I honestly do. And so I knew what I had and what I was capable of. And when I got there, I was just so relieved to know that all those other people all had the same skill level, maybe in different areas. But as a team, we were going to be something.
Yeah, fantastic. Any last questions before we finish off? Nope. Okay.
We had one, Chris.
Oh, you do? Yeah, sorry, Melissa, go for it.
There was one that I just saw came up on the feed around how do you influence someone who's not taking COVID-19 seriously? So I think that's a really great question, and I guess it comes back to influence tactics. So it's really good to think about the fact that when we're trying to influence other people, when you're thinking about how do you, as Gabe said, if you're thinking about how you expand that influence circle, you need to think about what is the most effective way to influence someone, and it could be different things. There's different tactics around influencing others. So it might be rational persuasion, it might be data, logic, facts and figures. That might be the way that you could influence them if they're not taking it seriously. It could be a personal appeal. You could draw on your relationship and talk to them about, how important it is to you that they stay well. So it's important to think about the fact that you do have a range of different approaches or tactics when you're trying to influence others, and it will depend on the individual. If I give a personal example, my parents started off, as many baby boomers did, not taking COVID-19 seriously. So they were still going to the movies, going out for lunch and dinner when most people were staying at home. And they felt it was fine because no one else was at the movies and no one else were in the restaurants. But there was a reason for that, but they didn't see that was anything to do with COVID-19. So with them, I went down the path of, I have a very strong relationship with my parents. And I said to them that I really needed them to be well. I needed them to get through this, and to do that, to get through this process, they needed to stay home. So I used that personal appeal. I talked about my children. I talked about how they needed their grandparents. So I influenced through my relationship with them. So when you're trying to influence, think about the fact that you have different tactics that you can use to make sure that you get that impact on others.
And further to that, Lisa, I guess one of the models that both you and I have been using a lot in our exec coaching is the Francis Fry model of trust. And you touched on some of those things before around trying to balance your message with logic, empathy and authenticity. And sometimes to just map out what your message is that touches on all three of those points. Just like you've said, you can talk to your parents about the logic piece, but you're doing it with empathy and you're coming at it from your position as well. And it's a really handy tool, and very easily accessible as well. Francis Fry's work, you can just have a look at that on YouTube as well.
On YouTube, that's right. Fantastic. There's a very good TED Talk, very easy to find. Thank you, experts, Gabrielle and Melissa. Thankfully, there are smarter people in this organisation who know stuff. I'll tell you, someone who knows stuff, it's Lolo Lavina. My goodness, how great to have you guys on the show, Sarah and Nenad. Lolo Lavina, if you don't know them, based in Sydney, they're an intoxicating brew of Romany mayhem. Normally performing as a septet, today they are Romany husband and wife duo Sarah Bidak and Nenad Radic. Lolo Lavina have played in the Opera House Concert Hall, Havana World Music Festival in Cuba, Gurcha Festival in Serbia, through the Pacific Islands, Macau, China, across East and West Europe, and at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. Guys, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. It's great to see your faces. Sarah, I'll start with you. So you are self-described as a Hungarian-Australian Romany Gypsy singer. Now, I know the Hungarian and Australian bit, and I am ashamed to say I know little about Romany. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Romany people?
Absolutely. Okay, so Romany people are otherwise known as Gypsy people. That's our, that's what we refer to often. And so, brief history of the Romany people is that we come from India, Rajasthan originally, and our language is based in Sanskrit. So there's lots of commonalities between Sanskrit and Romanes. And there's a few stories about the diaspora of the Romany people. And a nice one is that there was a gift of 1,000 musicians from the king of Rajasthan to the king of Persia, and for his birthday or something. And so the musicians went to Persia, and they were given a cart full of corn each, and the corn was for planting, and so that they could live their lives in Persia with these crops of corn, and but they ate the corn instead of planting it, and then after their time in Persia, they decided they tried to get back home to Rajasthan, where they were not allowed home for whatever reason. I don't quite know why. And then that's how the diaspora started. And the diasporas from the Middle East through Turkey, through Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Sydney, Australia.
Australia. So obviously, I suppose what I do know is that music is a very large part of the culture of the Romany people. Why is that? Do you have an understanding of why that might be?
The music. Well, it was actually always that. Everyone, thanks so much for having us. It's really
a pleasure.
Yeah. So this was actually one of the jobs and the things that Romani people did while they were living in India. They were not farmers. They were not businessmen or traders. They lived actually from the music they played, and they were crafting actually pots from metal, from copper, and tools. How do you call this for horses?
Oh, bridles.
Bridles. So this is actually still, I think Romani people in a few parts in Europe are doing. And the music was important for them because it was a kind of way to express themselves, to earn money, of course, and to tell later when they traveled.
Hey, Chris, back
from Persia. Sorry?
Hey.
Oh, Darren's back. That's good.
Chris, I'm so sorry.
That's
You're
okay.
amazing, Darren. Thank you for your story. Sorry to interrupt.
Look, I couldn't believe it. It just come up low battery, and I dived over because our little granddaughter that you met earlier had actually been playing with the cord underneath.
Oh, that's all right.
Transformer, she's pulled the plug.
That's all right. Well, unless you want to join Lolo Lavina, you can just sit tight because they're about to play. Up to you. Up to you.
No.
We might see another string to your bow. Sorry, Sarah. Yeah, sit tight, Darren. Sorry, Nanette, back to you.
Okay. So, and yeah, the music became for them an important part when they started traveling from Persia and arrived actually to Europe, east, west, all over Europe. And because from the beginning, actually, our people were discriminated and actually living on the edge of every society in which country they lived. And unfortunately, it's still today. And but I will tell later about that. And the music was actually a way to tell about their lives, about what they suffered on the way traveling from one country to the other, till they actually came to a point where they settled down. Today, Romani people actually are not traveling anymore. There's not many left, so they settled down in the countries where they lived, or they going to find a better life in other countries from the region where they came.
Oh, wow. So we've been talking a lot about influence today. You guys obviously have the opportunity through your performance, through your music, to influence others. Do you have a thought about that? Do you have an intention behind the performance that you do and the music that you create in terms of influencing others?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we see ourselves as Romani ambassadors. And as Nena touched on, there are many Romani people who are really marginalised, and in Europe, we're the most marginalised group over history. Huge unemployment, massive incarceration levels. There's not even many studies done on Romani health, say. And currently, Romani people don't have access to testing with COVID, sanitized,
actually in support
housing or
in support for daily living.
Yeah.
You must imagine. So there are many groups on Facebook and organizations who try to point this worldwide what's actually going on in countries, in Western countries who are rich, actually, who are not poor, that people from the Romani clans still don't have access to running water, no electricity, have not a support of food, for example. And in Western countries, every politician, every government is promising help to people, but those people are really outstanding. So they even don't try to get to them in touch and to see what they need, essentials, like you call it here.
And so we're in a very blessed, privileged position. We're very privileged to be well educated and live in a beautiful, safe country where prejudice is not prevalent here. And so we see our role as entertainers, of course, and also as educators, so we can influence.
We are very privileged to have you on the show today. Lolo Lovina is here to play. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the song that you're about to play and then launch into it?
Yes. So we thought it might be good to play the Romani International Anthem, which is called Jalem Jalem. It was decided on in the first meeting of Romani people from around the world in 1971 that was led by Yul Brunner, who's Romani from Romania. I might have got that wrong. And they decided on a flag and an anthem, among other things. And this is Jalem Jalem. Take it away, Nana.
Hey, Romale.
Ay, traveling. Eu mostro a família. Muda nada, once upon a time, I had a very big family, but during World War II, they were murdered by the Black Legions.
Hey, Romale.
Hooray! Fantastic, guys. Sarah Vidak and Nanad from Lolo Lavina. It's so fantastic to have you guys on and play. One little addition to that is they have a caravan which they play out of, which they drive around. It's a converted caravan. It's a mix of Australian and Romani culture in there. It's fantastic. If you see them, please go and see Lolo Lavina. They're just a fabulous act and work corporately as well for all our corporate viewers out there. Thank you. We've come to the end of our show. It's 3 o'clock. That's impossible. Thank you to our special guest speaker, Darren Flanagan. Darren, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making time to come and talk to us. Even if we didn't have COVID-19, I would love to shake your hand and buy you a beer. You're a very special man to us, and thank you so much for sharing your story here today. Darren tells his story at corporate events. He's a motivational speaker across Australia and internationally, can be contacted through Leading Voice Speaker Management in Melbourne. Thank you so much for being on the show, Darren.
Chris, I thank you, and I just want to apologise because when I came back on, I didn't realise you were still live. I thought you were over. And
it's the magic.
You talk about circles of control. Yeah, well, you had no control over me or my 8-month-old granddaughter, so sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. I think you've done enough, okay? You're okay. I won't take that personally at all. Doesn't change my thought about you at all. Thanks, Darren. Thank you to our house band today, Sarah Vidak and Nenad Radic from Lolo Lavina. Links to their website are on our pages on Facebook and YouTube. Please check them out when they're next in your town. They're absolutely awesome. Thank you also to my Interchange colleagues, Gabrielle Harris and Melissa Giles. We will see you next week. Thanks for your contribution today. Finally, thank you to the show's producer, Double Leopard, Emma Grace. Are we going to see you today? Are we going to see Emma? Come on. Come on. Hey, there's Emma. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma. Great to have you back. Make sure you subscribe to the show. There will be links on our Facebook and YouTube pages and in the descriptions, hopefully, on how to subscribe. Or you can go to interchange.com.au. We can also customize this show to suit your business. We have all your people on and talk about the things that matter in your business, as well as get your business's musical acts to play for the rest of the organization. Sounds good? Sounds good. That does sound good. I'm looking forward to seeing you for another episode of the 2 p.m. Project next Friday. Chris Gabbardi is my name. I am a creative director here at Interchange. It's been a pleasure to have your company here. In the meantime, stay safe. I really mean that. See you next week.